Dr. Travis Guse is a pastor, an ICF life and faith coach, and a Gallup Strengths coach. And living in Williamsburg, Virginia, Travis's passion is empowering everyday believers to discover and live out their authentic calling in Christ. His top 5 are includer, ideation, strategic, connectedness, and futuristic. So welcome, Travis.
Thank you. And as you can tell from my Clifton strengths, I have a lot of ideas, and the executing, that's a little harder, but yeah, thank you. Privileged to be here today.
Well, thank you very much, as I said, for coming along. And one of the reasons why we've invited you to come along is because you've recently launched a book called To Be, and we really want to hear more about it. And can you just explain a little bit more about who you are and your background and what really prompted you to write the book?
Yeah. So I have been in ministry for a number of years. In my tradition, I'm in the Lutheran Church. I served as a director of Christian education for about 6.5 years, doing a lot of more traditional youth ministry, some outreach ministry, and then kind of finally took the leap to go to seminary. And so after seminary, I got my first call as a pastor out in Southern California. And it was okay, but there were some difficulties that happened. I believe I sent the first chapter of my book for everybody. So if you didn't get a chance to read that, I lay out this in a little bit more detail, but just had some challenges with a coworker, some hurts and pains for my wife and I, and had to take a step away from ministry for a little bit. And it probably was one of the most difficult and challenging times of my life. Really wrestled with, who am I if I'm not a pastor, if I'm not doing ministry things? Because I think a lot of us, whether it's in ministry, but I think it's other areas of our life, we get our identity wrapped up in what we do, our performance, what we achieve, our positions. And when all that's stripped away, it leaves you wondering, who am I and what am I here for? And that's a difficult time. It was about 1.5 years. I kind of equate it to being like a wilderness experience. But during that time, I really had nowhere else to go but back to my faith into God. Who was I in him? And God kind of reshaped me. I kind of talk about it like a crucible moment that God formed me, shaped me, reminded me of who I was, not in what I did, but who I was in my calling in him. And over that time, I kind of came across 2 exciting things. One of them was the Clifton Strengths Assessment. Back in the day, Strengths Finder. So that was around 2007 through a church in LA called Mosaic. They were using it as part of their leadership development. And then from there, I found out about coaching, was trained as a strengths coach through the Faith Division that Gallup used to have, and then went on to become an ICF certified coach. And I really saw with coaching, wow, an amazing way to help people discover their calling and how to live that out. I had really started diving in during that time in Luther's teaching on vocation, because I was struggling with, well, what is my calling now if I'm not a pastor? And then with Clifton Strengths, understand, okay, this is how God's molded and shaped me uniquely. Now, what's it look like to walk with somebody to live that out? I had a great coach at the time, and it just really, for me, was like drinking the Kool-Aid. It was like, this is awesome. I mean, Clifton Strengths, coaching, vocation, starting to put it together. And I knew I wanted to do coaching as part of my calling moving forward in life. So as difficult as that time was, if it wasn't for that, I don't know if I would have discovered all these things and the way that I did that really has kind of shaped my life and ministry ever since.
It's interesting you pick up on the role of a pastor, and I've heard this in leadership many times where people feel that they're on a pinnacle and they're being watched, and they take on the role and persona that they think other people need to see.
Yeah.
And that, I sense, was sort of creating those areas of doubt. Well, people want me to be this, but it's not me. Who am I? And I get where you're coming from on that. And I've heard that said amongst other leaders and things.
Yeah. People don't want their pastor having a bad day. And yet we have bad days. And I think it's hard because you can't fully be you all the time. And it's really challenging.
And everybody, as you say, wants you to have a good day, and you have to put on that persona piece. And yeah, that there's that challenge, there's that fight within and that battle within on that. So absolutely, I get that you're not alone with that. Is that the sort of demographic of the people who you've written the book for, or sort of is there a particular audience that you have in mind?
Yeah, for me, my heartbeat, and I think this was me getting out of ministry for a while. I really have a heartbeat for the priesthood of all believers, or what I term in my book, everyday believers. I think a lot of times we think within the life of the church, we think of those who have callings as pastors, teachers, youth ministers, music ministers. They have holy callings, and everybody else just has stuff we do. And I think what I really kind of discovered or really rediscovered during that time was that, it's not just those in professional ministry who have a holy calling, but every single person who is called by Christ has a holy calling that they live out in life. And I think that was one of the beauties. I had come across a book during that crucible time called God at Work by Gene Edward Veith. And it was very formative for me to say, you know what, I still have a holy calling, even if I'm not serving as a pastor. And to not lift up the calling. We don't want to push it down either of church workers, but to not lift it up above lay people. But everybody has a holy calling. Luther's very big on this. It's not just the pastors and the monks and the nuns. It's the baker and the merchant and the farmer have just as holy callings. Their work is different that they're called to, but the calling is all equal before God. And so for me, my heartbeat has always been about the everyday believer, to let them know that there's more for them to do in God's economy than just pray, pay, and obey. That God has a holy calling upon their life. It may be very different from their pastors, but it's a holy calling nonetheless.
And I've certainly in my life, sort of God really sort of broke me and took me through quite a journey before I was able to find my calling. And it sounds as if you may have experienced something fairly similar on that as well.
Yeah.
And so take us through some of the contents and the structure of sort of what you describe in the book. So how would you help somebody sort of find their calling? What are the steps involved?
Yeah. So instead of just kind of what I think we typically would understand coaching to be like free range coaching, like the client just kind of decides whatever they want to talk about, and then we're with them on that journey. What I worked on was developing what we call a coaching framework. So maybe the free range is like the horse that just runs wild wherever. We kind of put a fence around saying, okay, we're going to do coaching, but we're going to kind of put some boundaries here. And it's around vocation. It's around calling. Now, how the client decides that this applies to their life and how they live that out, there's freedom within that. But what I wanted to do was create a biblical and kind of theological structure, this lens of vocation that Luther taught so much about, and then to say, okay, how can we coach people in deepening their awareness of who are they in Christ? How have they been gifted? And then to live that out in love and service to neighbor, which for Luther was primarily what vocation was all about. And so out of that, I created the vision of Called to Be, empowering everyday believers to discover and live out their calling in Christ. And then we kind of created the framework around three elements. The first is identity, our ultimate calling in Christ that nothing can be taken away from, no matter if you have a job or lose a job, you're married or single, whatever it is, you still are a child of God and part of the priesthood of all believers. And then your unique identity of God's workmanship, gifting, and design. We call that your divine GPS. So just like your car has a GPS device, or our phones to help us navigate life, that God has put an internal wiring inside of us of the gift of our personalities, our passions in life, and then obviously strengths, Clifton strengths, the God-given talents we have, and then how we can utilize that in love and service to others. So that's around identity. Empowerment, that we need to be caring for ourselves and practicing good self-care, heart, soul, mind, and body. And then the last is impact. Now we start living out who we are in our ultimate calling and our ultimate identity and unique identity in love and service to our neighbors, in our families, which is kind of the original calling of life that God gave there in creation, within the church, within the workplace, and then also in our communities within society at large. And so it's those three elements, but yet underneath all of that is this idea that our being needs to precede our doing. So you understand who you are in Christ, how you've been gifted, making sure you're practicing some good self-care, and then now what's it look like to practically live that out to be the blessing that God intends us to be, all with what he's blessed us in Christ.
I love the way how you've broken it down into three different sections and three very different elements on that. Because I'm hearing that people come to me and say, I want to know what my calling is. But well, I say, well, who are you? How has God made you?
Right.
Well, they give a fairly bland answer, but as we know as coaches, there's a very deep answer as well
Right.
on there. So they very much want to get to the finish line without sort of going to the start line. They just want to sort of jump in halfway through on that. But I like the way you've really got to work on yourself first, work out who you are, how God has made you. And then from that, you can then empower it and then find your calling with it. And so you mentioned obviously Clifton Strengths as part of finding your identity. And I think you mentioned some other assessments in there as well. How crucial do you think that is with those assessments that makes a difference in getting your true identity rather than their perceived identity?
Yeah, I think some people do stumble into who they are and what they do best in life, or they're told from others. But I think that intentionality of having somebody who'd walk along with you and utilizing some of these really valuable tools. I mean, I know for me, my number one tool in coaching is Clifton Strengths. It's the one that seems to be the most energetic for my clients. It is practically applied, not just in the church, but in everyday life. And that's what I love is when I was even in the parish as a pastor, I'd have members who say, I not only know how to use this in the church, but I can turn around on Monday morning and utilize Clifton Strengths. And I think that's where maybe I'll take a little aside, is a little different from spiritual gifts. And I don't want to downplay spiritual gifts, but I think looking at the lens of God-given talents, I think translates beyond the world of the church into daily life really effectively. So I think it's from that, and then there's really some good assessments out there. I know every group or organization that develops assessment thinks that theirs is the end all be all. And as valuable as I think Clifton Strengths is, there's also some really some good ones. So for part of understanding personality, we take a look and utilize the DISC assessment. I used to utilize MBTI. I think that's a very valuable one as well to kind of get to the temperament of personality. There's also a lot of great work out of VIA, out of the field of positive psychology, understanding that part of our personality that can be shaped, our character, our values. And then tapping into passion. That's kind of the gas in the tank that gets us motivated and moving. And boy, when you can get not only individuals, but groups that are around common passions, that's where you see some real excitement. And then leveraging who you are and the gifts that have been given to you. It's really, I think, a very exciting thing when that's unleashed then in life, that you have a deep awareness of, hey, this is who God's wired me to be. This is who I've been gifted to be. And now taking that and looking around your different contexts and saying, okay, not what does the world need? I think that's too big a question, but who uniquely needs what I have to offer? And when you can match that together, that's where we can make the greatest impact in life.
And I like how you're looking at lots of different assessments to get lots of different perspectives in different ways to really sort of root what someone's identity is on there. And then when we move on to the sort of empowerment element, you've got models and things in your book which you describe of how to use that. Do you have any sort of aspects that we as coaches, how we could use some of those pieces to help people and guide our clients and things through using those models and things?
Yeah, I've got one in there that I really kind of developed kind of a self-assessment around the idea of from Luke, I believe it's chapter 10, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, love your neighbor as yourself. At that intersection of loving God and loving neighbor is this uniqueness that God has made us, this hybrid spiritual, physical creation that we are, that is represented by heart, soul, mind, strength, that they're unique. And yet we also know they're interconnected when you get into the Greek, that they kind of bleed over into each other. And it just shows how integrated we are as well. And so recognizing that sometimes we can really focus on our spiritual care, but are we also caring for ourselves physically? Because if you're not taking care of yourself physically, it's hard to show up at your best when you're tired and you don't have energy. Are you caring for your heart? That relational aspect of who we are. Are you mentally caring for yourself so that you're staying sharp? And especially, let's face it, as we get older, staying sharp mentally is very important for our effectiveness and usefulness in life. And so it's this whole idea that self-care is not a selfish thing. It's for the benefit of others, so that we can be effective in our callings. And so I've got a nice little diagnostic tool in there on a scale of 1 to 10 to help people say, hey, where are you in terms of each of these 4 areas of self? And then doing some coaching about what would it look like if not going from a low number to a high number in a giant bound, but what would a 1 or 2% point increase look like in this? Describe what it would be like, what would be happening, what would be different, and then doing some coaching and helping them create an empowerment plan, 1 or 2 items in each of those 4 areas so that they can practice better self-care in their life.
If you don't mind me interrupting for a second, I just want to show, this is the model you're talking about, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And it's just done brilliantly, to use one of Richard's words.
I didn't know I had that word, but anyway. Thank you, Kathy. It's good to see that, and it's obviously in the book as well with that. Moving on to the third element about impact, you have a chapter in the book called Impact, and then you have another, or Making an Impact, and then you have the next chapter is about making a difference. Can you sort of describe how these two differ on that, sort of making an impact and then making a difference?
Yeah, that's good. And I don't know if I've even thought about that as distinguishing those two, but I think that it's we all desire to make an impact. But the making the difference, I think, comes down to, do we know ourselves and how we've been gifted? And then to look around intentionally to our context to say, okay, now how can I be a blessing in my own unique way? And I think that's how we make a difference. Because one of the things I've struggled with is in ministry. How many times have we gone to like evangelism trainings? We've trained, and people, I think, know I'm supposed to go and share the good news of Jesus with others, but how many don't do it? And I think a lot of it is because we haven't taken that extra step of coaching people to personally and practically help them understand, what does it look like for me to go share the good news with my neighbor? Well, what's that mean for me if I'm an introvert versus an extrovert? What if that, I have the gift of relator rather than woo? What's that going to look like? Because I think we kind of have an idea of what we're supposed to do rather than understanding what can I do and how should I do it based on who God's gifted me to be. And then it's saying, who are my neighbors in each of these contexts? And then matching that up to say, what's it look like for me to uniquely love and serve within my context and with my neighbors that God has given to me. And it's that intersection that's where we really start making a difference and truly make an impact.
Now, I like the example you had in that chapter about some volunteers helping a community with a new medical center. And I think the first set of volunteers, they actually built a medical center, but it really wasn't an improvement in health. And then the second set of volunteers came along, and they actually, I forget the word you used, but they got alongside the community there. They actually realized what the problem was, that it was the poor water quality or something like that, which is making people ill in the first place. And I really sensed that it was the second group that was making a difference. The first group made an impact. They made some noise and they created something. Yeah. But the people who really made a difference were those people who really listened, and they got alongside the community who was there, found out what was needed, what the root cause of the problems were, and actually were able to resolve those things. Yeah. On that. And that's sort of having that transformational change on that.
Yeah, and that's where I go into that idea of the BLESS model. And BLESS is an acronym of, first, we've got to bond with people. We've got to learn, take time. So many times I think we got to take time to get to know them and learn, engage with them, make space in our life to have them in our life. Then we can begin to serve. And then only after they know we care to be able to share the good news of the gospel and share that with them.
Yeah, I think it's Bond. That was the word I was looking for. So the beginning of your bless acronym on there. And I love the sort of, as you've put it into sort of three very simple but sort of involved steps for people to use to sort of help sort of find their calling. Can you share any examples of where somebody has been through this process, or you've helped somebody go through the process and the difference is actually made for them and the difference they can make to others?
Yeah, I share a few different stories of some personal clients that I've worked with. And by the way, for all of us who are ICF coaches, I got permission to share those stories because we like to practice confidentiality. But I think probably the one that stands out the most is one of my first clients. He was a member of my church, young Hollywood producer, really kind of on the edge with his faith. Doing Snoop Dogg videos. And he was even being offered, hey, you could do porn videos. Nobody would need to know we changed your name. And he's like, listen, I don't want to do this stuff. I want to live out my faith in the calling that I have in Hollywood. And so we coached together. And it was interesting when he said, hey, this is who I am in Christ. He said, this is how I've been gifted. And now let's operate out of this mentality of freely you receive, freely give. He started operating in a different way in Hollywood, which is very much of what can you do for me? And he was operating out of what can I do for you? And people are like, who in the world is this guy? But operating in a different way than is kind of the norm culturally in Hollywood. Opened up a number of incredible doors for him to rub elbows with people that you and I will never rub, have a chance to love and serve in ways we never will, and to be able to actually share the and do some really kind of cool kingdom projects at the time. And so I think it was very exciting to see just a person that, has been placed in a very unique context, and to be able to live out his faith and his identity in Christ as intentionally as he did, and the impact that he did and made a difference in some lives of people.
I love that story. And it's looking at sort of the unique situation we're in, the unique way we've been made, marrying the two up together,
Yeah.
and then just see how you can make a difference from that. And certainly with your book, I'm sure it's going to be making a big difference to a lot of people as they read it. Tell me a little bit about how you put the book together, because you mentioned that you're using Clifton Strengths in there and you're using Clifton Strengths themes. How is that process to be able to include that content in your book?
Yeah. So just to let you know, so my book really is an outflow of my dissertation that I finished it's been about 2 years ago that I completed it, taking a look at Luther's teaching on vocation in the field of coaching and marrying those together. But then spent the next couple years afterwards, get done with a dissertation and a doctorate. I need something to do with my time. So, hey, let's write a book. So going through and trying to take something that's very academic and theological and really try to make it personal, practical, and accessible. And that took some time to translate that. By the way, just to let you all know, I did not do that alone. I hired a ghostwriter. So the concepts, the ideas, and a lot of it flowed from my dissertation, but I had somebody who walked with me to help translate it to more of a general audience. So just to say, hey, there's a value of ghostwriters out there for anybody who maybe feels intimidated about writing a book. And it's a lot of the information and knowledge really is yours. They're just helping you to organize it and communicate it in a little bit of a different way. The second thing, and this is what you were talking about, is obviously in both my dissertation and the book, wanted to definitely talk very openly about the different tools that we were utilizing. And I remember being a little nervous because I know Gallup really is very protective of their intellectual material. And so being afraid of saying, okay, here's my book, I'd like to do something with it, Gallup. I actually found that the process was really good. I've been working with an individual, Scott Wright. He's part of the legal counsel with licensing and permission of Gallup's intellectual property. He's been fantastic to work with. Now, I know I had a little bit of a lower bar than you did, Richard, of getting permission. Mine was simply research in a book and then getting permission. So after they reviewed it, signed a document, I've got to put all these little copyright things in and put some acknowledgments that this is not Gallup's ideas, this is my ideas. I'm happy to do that. And then pay $500. And once you do that, you're off to the races. So I did that with the book. And actually, this morning, I just signed a second agreement. I'm taking my dissertation and getting ready to publish with Whip&Stock as well. So been through the process. And actually, it was even quicker this time. So that they knew my name. It's I know it might feel daunting, but I really would encourage that they want to help you and help see Gallup's name get out there. So don't be intimidated by that.
Well, congratulations on going through that process. I think the process now is a lot easier than when I went through it with Cascade many years ago.
Thank you for forging the way for us, Richard. I appreciate it.
I did certainly feel like a little bit like a pioneer in those days on that. So congratulations with that. And that leads me on to my next question, as in what's next and how can we help you?
That is a great question. I'm still trying to figure that out. So we've got the second book that hopefully will be coming out in the fall. It's really kind of the technical manual behind Called to Be. But where my heart and vision really is with this is I don't want to just stop with a book. I want to see the book impact lives. And so what we're looking to do, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Stephen Ministry. So Stephen Ministry is a ministry that helps raise up caregivers in a congregation, people going through difficult times, to have somebody walk with them, not as counselors, but somebody who cares for them and is supporting them in the difficult moments. What I wanted to do was to take our vision of Called to Be and see if we could raise up, similar to Stephen ministers in congregations, what we want to call Called to Be Barnabas coaches. So we think about Barnabas, who saw the divine call of God upon the life of Paul. Though nobody else wanted to touch him, he was willing to come and encourage him and support him in that calling and walk along with him to realize that to be the blessing that God had gifted and intended him to be. And so what we want to do is help raise up these kind of coaches within congregations. So we're working right now with a partnership with Coach Approach Ministries that we provide a lot of our ICF certified coach training through, to design a specific ICF certified coach training to raise up these Barnabas coaches within congregational contexts. We're working on a Bible study series and a sermon series for launching it in the ministry. And I'm even looking at down the line, this is where my ideation gets ahead of me sometimes, maybe a redesigned confirmation material for young people around the vision and elements of Called to Be, where it's not just, okay, I've got to learn the 10 Commandments and the Lord's Prayer and the Apostles' Creed, and what's it going to matter to my life? But doing that through the lens of calling and vocation, that I think it's going to be much more impactful and practical.
Wow, there's quite a lot of ideas, and I can see all that coming together, and sort of really looking forward, leaning into ideation, futuristic coming out of that.
Where I always need help is executing. So if anybody that and influencing, able to help spread the word or help me figure out how to do that, that's where I always need help.